welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rasool. Tonight we're going to be speaking about nude pictures and sexually explicit content being posted online without the subject's response. Now, a few years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I spent the night at a former partner's house. And a while later, I discovered that he had taken a naked picture of me and posted it online onto a porn site. And I was obviously livid, very upset. This was someone that I trusted. Now, I'm telling this very personal story because in 2019, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed in some amendments to the Film and Publications Act that makes revenge porn illegal. Revenge porn is sexually explicit pictures and videos that are posted online without the consent of the subject with the intention to do harm. My story illustrates that it's not necessarily always revenge porn. This was just done just because. And so tonight we're going to be speaking about what it means when sexually explicit content is posted online without your consent, what the fallout is, and what legal recourse you have if this should happen. But before that, let's have a look at some of the ways that this has affected and impacted South Africans who had their pictures posted online.
Imagine someone stripping you naked in the middle of a busy street, suddenly exposing you to the leering eyes of strangers. Now imagine that this moment never ends, but repeats itself endlessly, and that as it does, all you can hear is the crowd shouting, "You deserved it." This quote by actress Amber Heard describes how she felt after her computer was hacked, intimate images stolen, and then posted on the internet in 2014. The hacker was later arrested and convicted. The case, while not revenge porn, illustrates the harm felt by victims when their intimate photographs are posted online without their consent, a practice also referred to as non-consensual pornography. Closer to home, in 2016, a local mother made the mistake of posting an intimate photo of herself meant for her husband in a parents' WhatsApp group. The photo was screenshotted and later posted on the internet with the woman's name, and it quickly went viral. In an interview later with You magazine, she said the fallout had been devastating. "I only sleep an hour at night. Then I'm laying there and thinking, I don't think people are able to go that far, that people are willing to break your life in pieces, and when they've finished with you, and it's not enough, they take on your husband and children," she said. This case specifically illustrates the harm that is caused not just to the victim, but that spreads through the family and even to the victim's children through shaming and bullying. After the break, we'll be speaking to an attorney about the legal recourse available to you should your private pictures be posted online. Stay tuned, we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rasool, and tonight we're speaking about revenge porn, or the posting of nude pictures and sexually explicit content on the internet without the subject's consent. Now, before the break, we heard about how this affects certain people and the backlash afterwards. We are joined now by Attorney Nazli Williams from Patton Williams Attorneys to walk us through what happens when these pictures are posted online and what you can do about it.
Welcome, Nazli, and thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Nice to be here.
So, Nazli, as you know, we're speaking about revenge porn, and we're speaking about legislation that recently came into effect. And I just wanted to start with, if you could tell us which legislation covers the issue of nudes or sexually explicit content being posted on the internet and social media, and what are the consequences for someone who perpetrates this?
Thank you, Lenina. Well, revenge porn is nothing new, but I mean, you just said that recently legislation came in that now criminalizes revenge porn. So in October 2019, the president signed in the Films and Publications Amendment Act, And this act regulates the distribution of sexual, explicit images and films that are being distributed without an individual's consent, and then with the intention of causing that person harm. Okay, that is together with hate speech, and then with the distribution of child pornography. So what has changed about this act is that this specific provision will, if you are going to distribute a pornographic image of someone without that person's consent, you will be held criminally liable. So you will be, if the person is not identifiable in that image or in that film, you can be sentenced to up to 2 years in prison, and you can pay a fine for up to 150,000 rand or both. If the person is identifiable in that image or in that film, then the penalty is doubled up. So you are going to be convicted, and you are going to be paying a fine of 300,000 rand or up to 300,000 rand, or an imprisonment for up to 4 years. So where it was not regulated before, you would have maybe applied for a protection order, or you would have chosen the civil route, claim damages for defamation. You can now actually specifically lay criminal charges for revenge porn or distribution of sexual images without the person's consent.
I just want to ask, with the Film and Publications Amendment Act, it distinguishes between consent to take a photo or video. So I could say, yes, you could take, you know, these racy pictures of me, and I do consent. But also it distinguishes between consent to distribute that photograph. And
yes.
In that case, what is the sort of legal protection that it allows somebody for versus distributing?
There's two consents actually at play here. The one is the consent that you give the specific individual to view this photograph. For instance, you have a boyfriend, and he or you take an explicit sexually explicit image, and you give the person the consent to take that photo, or you give the person the photo, the consent to view it.
Yeah.
But that consent that you give that person to view that image does not automatically give that person the consent to distribute the image to third parties. The act specifically actually also deals with the issue of the consent. It says that the prohibition applies even where the person has consented to the other person taking the image or viewing the image. So even if I give you consent to look at the image or to take the image of me or the film, I do not give you consent to distribute it to a third party without my consent. So that is the difference that comes into play there, and that people must understand, which is very important.
And Nazli, just to clarify, when we talk about distribution, because we know there are many types of social media. There's WhatsApp, which is sort of person to person, and there's Facebook media, which is basically publishing it. When we say distribution, we mean in any way. So even if your boyfriend sends it to his friend,
that is right. That is correct. Any form of distribution without internet, WhatsApp, email, text messages, if that image is going to leave that third person's viewing or that person's phone, it is distribution of it. So whatever channel that person is going to distribute it on, it is going to classify as distribution. I say he because these things mostly before women, but I actually also mean it could be a man or a woman that falls victim to this. But because it so often happens with females, that's why I will probably mostly say he or she in the different contexts.
The Act also makes provision for, intention to do harm. It specifically speaks about, and I think that's the context that is taken, where people are calling it revenge porn. Someone is posting or sending a sexually explicit image or video of you in order to harm you in some way, harm your reputation and so forth. From a legal standpoint, how strict are they on intention? And if I may just, for example, earlier on I shared an experience of mine where someone, a former partner, took a picture of me while I was sleeping. So the picture was taken without my consent, and it was posted onto a website without my consent. he was not doing that to cause me harm. He was doing that to, whatever. People do things for silly reasons,
Yes.
for fun, for his own, I don't know, to be cool or to be quiet. So how does
Yes.
it fit into intention and the criminality of this act?
Listen, in criminal law, there are elements of crimes, right? And for a court to, or for a conviction to be secured, all the elements of a crime must be proven, okay? If one of the elements are not present, then it might mean, or it could mean that the person or the perpetrator cannot be found guilty of that crime. That intention aspect, when it comes to this legislation that are now under discussion, I think it is problematic, and even all the articles that discusses this concept also recognize that intention might be a problem, because the only two things that the victim at the moment have to prove is that the image was shared without his or her consent, and that it was done with the intention to harm that person. But it often happens, like you say, that the person does not share the image with the intention to harm, so to speak, the victim, but it could be for likes on Facebook, it could be for profit, maybe selling the image, maybe the person does it for entertainment purposes, to be the cool guy in the club and all of that. In that case, yes, it will be very difficult to prove intention to harm the victim, because that person actually did not sit there and say, I'm going to send this image to the boys club or to a Facebook group because I want to show this woman that I can degrade her and harm her. He can actually just, or she can actually just sit there and say, I want to send this because someone is going to pay me 10,000 Rand for this image. And then the intention is completely off from what the act says.
Yeah.
I am, for one, very interested in how the court is going to practically apply this. We must remember that the law is not stagnant. The law is dynamic. Every day there is new legislation signed into operation. Okay, sometimes it happens that something has not been practically tested by the courts yet. Okay, and in such a case, the court makes a decision because one of the parties might even bring something under the court's attention that alters the whole operation of that law, and the court develops the law as you go along. So I'm very interested to see how it's going to happen. I cannot go too much into the whole concept of intention as it relates to criminal law in itself. As you know, I'm a family law attorney, but I was thinking, when I was thinking about this whole intention deal or the element, I was thinking to myself that perhaps if one had to approach it from a dolus eventualis angle, like they used it in the Oscar case, where a person can be held liable for the foreseeable consequences of an act that they commit, and that they see the consequences that might harm the other person, but they nevertheless proceed with it, disregard the possible harm, and does it anyway. So, because intention, there's different kinds of intention. There's direct intention, there's dolus eventualis, where a person can be held liable just for the fact that you could have foreseen that harm was going to befall the victim. So maybe the court could, or the victim can approach it that way, where it's dealt with from that angle. But at the moment, it's new legislation. We are all waiting to see how the courts is going to practically apply it. But I am telling you, I agree that it is very problematic, because sometimes something can be done negligently, but the harm is equally as devastating. Just because it was done negligently and not intentionally doesn't mean that harm doesn't befall the victim in the same way. So I'm looking forward to see how the courts are going to deal with the fact that only intention needs to be proven to secure a conviction.
It's very, very interesting points that you raise. And also, probably, I mean, I would think even logically in this case, harm is, you could obviously see the harm.
Foreseeable.
Exactly. And in cases that I've come across, for instance, a lot of the women, and where we've seen this happen, even especially in the case of sharing pictures of women and sharing pictures of mothers, how the harm filters out to the parents, filters out to the children, whose mothers are now identified, children ago. So there's so many aspects and ways that this can filter out harm that you couldn't even think of.
We can only watch and see what the courts are going to do practically and how this law is going to develop into something that is a bit more, can I say, realistic. Because I doubt every picture that has ever been sent, sexually explicit picture, I doubt that has always been done with intention, like in the case that you described in your personal experience, where it was done for other reasons than to harm you. The courts will have to look at that to protect people like that as well.
Yes, no, definitely. And I think also just given the proliferation of pornography in general, and pornographic imagery. Nazli, I want to ask you, so if we were using a scenario, so two people have broken up and one partner has posted sexual images online of his or her former partner. And I think here we are moving directly into what is termed revenge porn. Someone's had their pictures posted online. What are the next steps? How far can the law go in the removal of that image? So let's say it's me. I've now seen these pictures. I know of one case, for instance, where a former partner posted the image online and actually tagged the other person's friends and family in these images, was distributing it via messenger. You know, what's the first thing that I do? Can I get the images removed? Do I report the person to the police station? So what do we do?
There would be two angles here. That would be, the first one would be if the person is only still threatening to post the images. In that case, I would advise you get a protection order to interdict the person from distributing the images, of course, or protection order in terms of either the Domestic Violence Act or the Harassment, Protection Against Harassment, the Act. If the photos are already posted, then obviously you can lay criminal charges in terms of this act that we're speaking of, where you know, the person is criminally charged. But then one must also look at other remedies that was in place before this act came into operation. Before, if the photos was already posted or were already posted on a platform, you could, for instance, follow the civil route by claiming damages for defamation of character, because obviously your reputation has been impugned, your dignity, you know, and your privacy. So that would have been not the old way, but it runs concurrently with the new legislation that's in, which is a criminal remedy. And then there's also criminal injuria. You can lay criminal charges for criminal injuria because your dignity was impugned and your privacy is being trampled. So the first thing a person would do if a person is threatened with, like, what they call exposure, would be to apply for the protection order to prevent that or to interdict that person from distributing the images. If it's already posted, then the crime is completed. You're going to lay criminal charges against that person. You're going to use this act. You can even, the cybercrimes is still in a bill form, I believe. So soon you will also be able to do it in terms of that. Although I believe when I look at the cybercrimes bill, I believe that it's a little bit of a duplication there, which is section 18F, I think, of the Films and Publications Act. But that would be the first step. If you note the pictures on a public forum, the first thing you have to do is you have to lay criminal charges. You can concurrently also take out the protection order to prevent the further distribution of the images, because obviously while the case is being investigated, this person is still sitting with images that they can continue to spread. So I would say get a protection order immediately and file criminal charges for obviously this revenge porn in terms of this legislation that's under discussion.
Okay, and then just with regard to, you know, laying those charges and evidence, Nazli, I want to ask you, one of the things that I advise somebody to do was just take as many screenshots as you can of the photos that are being distributed. Are those things that we would take with us to the court? Yeah. The application for the protection order and or for criminal charges?
I believe the best evidence rule will apply here as well. Any evidence that is best evidence to prove your case would be suitable. Of course, the source of where the screenshots emanated, it would help a lot if the original of that maybe showing your phone or actually physically going into the website, leaving a link for the judge or the magistrate to access. That is always best, because you can physically show that it has been received to my server, or your cell phone service provider, giving the judge the link. But if you're going to attach screenshots, that is best evidence as it is on your application, meaning it's prima facie, okay? Meaning for now it is sufficient. If the other person would have to contest the, what do you call it, the authenticity or the what do you call it, if it's fake, you know, if it's fake, maybe made up or whatever, if that person had to contest the authenticity of those screenshots, then obviously you would have to dig a little bit deeper by maybe asking your service provider, cell phone service provider, to either confirm things or maybe handing in your physical cell phone. But I think when you do the initial application, there will be no issue against you attaching screenshots. Nobody's going to give you physically their phone for unless asked for.
Yes. Okay, Nazli, we're going to take a break quickly, but we're going to come back to this conversation after that.
Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we're speaking about revenge porn and the posting of nude pictures and sexually explicit content online without the subject's consent. Before the break, we were chatting to Nazli Williams from Patton Williams Attorneys. We now continue the conversation.
So, Nazli, before the break, we were speaking about revenge porn, and we're speaking about, evidence and attaching screenshots when either applying for the protection order to prevent the publicizing or the publishing of this image or the distribution of this image, and also possibly laying criminal charges against the person if the images have been distributed already. I just want to shift the narrative quickly to the platform. So we're looking at a scenario where the images have been posted, and it could have been posted on a social media site. It could have been distributed via WhatsApp, which I imagine would be a little bit more difficult to sort of track the spread of media. There are also, other porn sites. There are porn sites where people can distribute it. Are we able to remove those images? And is there a legal way for us to approach the platforms to remove those images? Like, where do we go from there once the image is up?
It happens often that, Facebook and Google, they're not going to, because of this whole freedom of speech and freedom of expression thing that people seem to jump on thinking there's no limitation to it, which is absolutely wrong. There are limitations to free speech. There's a limitation to expression, all of those things. But many times it's very difficult to remove something from a platform without having a court order in hand. One can look at reviews sometimes that are even posted about someone where it is completely wrong, and Google will simply say, no, we are not going. You can tell the person, I've never dealt with this person. This person was never a client of mine. They've simply refused to do it. You will physically have to get a court order to have it removed. So I don't think in practice, even if the perpetrator had to be criminally liable for it, I think it will take the civil route to physically order the platform, unless they are nice and say, you can maybe say, listen, this person has been convicted and fined or imprisoned, and I want you now to remove these images from your platform. If you don't get any feedback, you will have to get a court order, and this forum or this platform will have to be served at the head offices. You will physically have to go the civil route, and you will have to obtain that court order. I know that it's not going to be very, it's not going to be easy, most likely, to just expect the forum to remove it because someone was convicted criminally. And I don't think it's fair that you would need to do all that rigmarole again civilly to ask this forum to remove it. But thankfully, I've noticed recently that a lot of the platforms are becoming very vigilant against things like revenge porn, and have actually updated their community guidelines. For instance, Facebook has now, it's called, I can't remember the word now, but it's an algorithm that detects photos that might be explicit and that might be posted against somebody's will. It's almost like they look at the text that goes with the picture. It's a whole algorithm that they have that actually isolates these pictures, and it can be removed. You can report it on Facebook as well. If it goes against their community guidelines, they will remove it. But sometimes Facebook says it doesn't go against our Facebook community guidelines, but they are becoming now more strict on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. They're becoming more stricter. They are actually now trying to detect these photographs and explicit images before the picture is reported. So hopefully it's not going to be necessary to get a court order to force these platforms to remove images like this.
Nazli, and just on the topic of images also, there was some talk about the type of image and what constitutes sexually explicit. You know, in terms of revenge porn. So in terms of legislation, and I think just like from your experience, what would constitute a sexual image? And I say this because different people have different perspectives in terms of what is sexual. You know, as I think also you could point to sort of the breastfeeding argument almost about whether breastfeeding is sexually explicit. I mean, that's such a contentious issue. But in the case of, have you seen any, you know, any problems around the definition of sexually explicit?
Yeah, in terms of Section 18F of this Films and Publications Amendment Act, at Section 5, subsection 5, the Act is giving some guidance on what would constitute sexual. For instance, if it shows part or all of a person's breast or anus or pubic area, and then also content that could be considered by a reasonable person on the street as being sexual. And then also, if the whole content in a whole, if you look at it in whole, that a reasonable person would consider that as sexual. So as far as I see it, it would be, for instance, where a person's exposed female breast, like I said, the anus, genitalia, and the pubic area. I think this is not going to be a question of how you perceive what you perceive as sexual, because the Act is now telling us what we should be seeing as sexual. If you see the person's breast exposed, it is assumed by a reasonable person to be sexual. If you see a person's exposed anus, the Act will recognize that as a sexually explicit image. If you see the person's genitalia or pubic area, it is deemed. So I think if you want to prove anything other than that as a sexual, say for instance, a boyfriend or an ex-boyfriend shares a photo where my arms are visible, and you can maybe see a little bit of my, let's say the nipple area, it's shining through the t-shirt. For me, if you would, not personally, but I mean for some women, that would be a sexual photograph of her. Even if you can't see the skin on the breast, you can only see the shadow of the nipples maybe. She could see that as sexual, but I think if she's going to lay criminal charges for that, she must be aware that the elements of this crime will need to be proven, and that the definition of sexual, she will have to, or the prosecutor who's prosecuting the case will have to illustrate or demonstrate to the court why she can deem that photograph as sexual. The law develops. Maybe the court decides in that case, you know what, the Act must be amended. It must also be if there is a slight shadow of a nipple. So it will differ from person to person, but if it's going to be different from the Act, the prosecutor has his job cut out for him, obviously, to bring it in line with the legislation.
Yes, and you're raising such interesting points, because you're making, you know, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of, it could really, you know, we're thinking of revenge porn, I think, in the extreme. So we're thinking of it almost as pornography, you know, what could be constituted as pornography. But let's say, for example, you have a very professional image, you are an executive, you are a journalist, you are an attorney, and some pictures of you in racy lingerie, let's say a sports type picture is released.
Yeah.
And once you start looking at the harm associated with that, we know that women are judged unfairly on sexuality, that
harshly,
very harshly, that all of, that words like slut and loose and etc. are bandied around, and all of those are somebody's reputation, whether people will do business with you, and so forth. And so I think it really presents really interesting things, and it presents really interesting things for us to think about in terms of what type of pictures we are taking and what types of things sort of make it up.
Yes.
Because I personally wouldn't, put pictures of myself of lingerie on the internet. So Nazli, just to bring us back again to what women should do, what those next steps are in terms of applying for the protection order. Is that a process to go to the police, or is that a process to go to the courts? And I think the same also with the criminal charges. I think I'm just asking, where's the first place that you go to?
What the person is supposed to do, or how it should work in practice, is that you can go to the police station and they give you the form 2 to complete. You fill out the form, they give you a form 1 that explains the process and all of that. But very often the police stations would send the person to court, okay? They would say, listen, go to court and go and apply at the domestic violence division, or for a harassment order there. So in practice, you should be able to go to the police station and get the necessary forms to complete it, okay? But I think just to be thorough, just go straight to court. Go to the magistrate's court. If you're not going to be instituting civil action for damages, I'm talking now about specifically a protection order. Go, if it's an intimate partner or former intimate partner, I think it would be good to go to the domestic violence court to apply for a protection order, complete the form 2. You will get an interim protection order, and there will be a return date for the person to come and show cause as to why the interim protection order must not be made a permanent protection order. So I think unless you're obviously faced with imminent harm, like for instance, violence against your person, or the person is actually at your door and is about to attack you, you're going to call the police. But I'm talking now specifically about the threat of exposing you again, like they call it on the internet, revenge porn.
Yeah.
Go to the court, go and apply for a harassment order or a protection order, and make it clear in the protection order, at least for the temporary one, that the person must refrain from publishing sexual content of you, or in fact any content of you, okay? Because whatever that person is going to post under the blanket of threat that there is not going to be to compliment you. It's most likely to unnerve you. It's most likely to emotionally distress, to place you under emotional distress. So refrain from all kinds of interaction, all postings, anything. That person has an opportunity to come on the return date, to come and show cause, meaning he can come and tell the court why this protection order must not be made permanent. And you must obviously have evidence that there is no grounds for this protection order to be made permanent, or that the person doesn't have any basis to bring this application. But protection order, I think, is good. Defamation, things like that are high court civil remedies, and obviously with high court comes legal costs, high legal costs. I think we can start with a protection order, yes.
A lot of people come on and they say, just don't do it, right? But we also know that it's very prolific, that when people are in relationships or when they are having fun, that these things are happening, and they're also happening among young people, very young women, very young, teenagers.
Yeah.
And, is there any advice that you can give in terms of, if you are going to do it, these are ways to protect yourself? What can we do?
Lenina, look, I typed this response out because I was hoping you would ask me this, and I actually want to read it.
No, that's please go.
Yes, women especially must be extremely careful with whom they share sexually explicit content with. I would prefer that people do not share sexually explicit images or films at all, even if it's your husband, even if it's your boyfriend or whoever it may be. Okay? Yes, you should be able to trust the partner. And yes, you should be able to trust a friend, but just because you have the right to be doing that doesn't mean that you should be doing that. Why am I saying this? We live in a very cruel world, okay? It would be unrealistic to expect everyone to act right just because you have a right to do something. Once the image is out there, you no longer have control over the material, whether you have a right or not. You will suffer harm most likely. Like they say, the internet never forgets. Know the risks and be wary of the consequences. Just because you have the right to do something does not mean it will alleviate the harmful consequences that can flow from it. The internet, social media is a terrible place. And you know what? It's not just about that person sharing that image. What if your phone gets lost? What if that person's phone gets lost? At the gym, the boys in the locker room, they scroll through the pictures. Oh, look at this. They share it to their friend or they share it to themselves. And I've earlier spoken to my husband about a matter or a case that happened in the United States. It was discussed on one of my private groups where it's a law group. But this woman, she lives in a state where there is revenge porn laws, okay? 25 of the 50 states or the 51 states in America has got the revenge porn laws. She lives in one of those states. A person shares these images of her, the person removes the images, okay? Pornhub removes the images, wherever it was shared, remove the images. A year later, she finds a job and her boss gives an instruction to go and print something from his laptop. She says she can't find it on the laptop. He asked her to go to his desktop or to another laptop to go and see if this thing that he needs printed is on there. What she saw on his private laptop was that exact same images and films that this person who was, I think, convicted, that person was convicted of sharing of revenge porn where it related, that concerned her. This person, this boss, had these images on his private laptop. So even though this boyfriend, ex-boyfriend was convicted or was reprimanded, even though Pornhub and Google and whoever removed these images, once it's out there on the internet does not forget because someone is bound to download it. Someone is bound to screenshot it. You cannot go to every house in the world and demand that people delete the screenshot. You can order Pornhub to remove it. You can order Google by means of a court order to remove an image. But once it's out there, it's out there. I understand that us as women, we've got rights. We do have rights, and we should be able to distribute to whoever we want to our images, sexual or whatever. You should be able to trust your partner. You should be able to trust your friend. But the reality is we live in a terrible world. We live in a cruel world. Once you lose control of that material, you will never know what happens to it after that. So I'm not saying you're not allowed to exercise your right to take a walk after dark. I'm not saying you shouldn't exercise your right to send your husband or your boyfriend explicit images. What I am saying is be aware of the risks, be aware of the consequences, be aware of the harm. If you are able to, in Afrikaans, you call it vereenselwig. What is the English word for it? If you can reconcile yourself with the consequences of your decision, then by all means, you can share it.
Wow, Nazli, thank you so much for that. I mean, I really loved the way the analogy that you used in terms of, what our rights are versus exercising those rights and the consequences of exercising those rights. You also mentioned something very interesting, which is what the legislation is in America and the States and how many of them do. If we want to compare sort of our new legislation on, revenge porn or on this issue to other countries, have you seen anything else interesting around the world that we should be aware of?
Yeah, you know what, we are following in South Africa now, the likes of New Zealand, Australia, and the United States when it comes to this revenge porn thing. So in the United States, I think I mentioned it earlier, 25 out of the 50 states, if you count Hawaii, it's 51. 25 of those states, they do have revenge porn laws. And then Canada used to have or not used to have, but they have cyberbullying laws, but it used to only apply to under 18s, meaning if the person who was revenge porn would fall under cyberbullying for them. So if the person was under 18, then that person could lay criminal charges. But now they have also adapted their laws in Canada and said, listen, any person of any age can now lay criminal charges against their cyberbullying legislation. And then there's England and Wales. There you go to prison for up to 2 years if you are found guilty of revenge porn or cyberbullying. And then Israel. Israel is my favorite because it seems to me like they just have a zero tolerance policy there. There you can go to jail for up to 5 years, plus you are registered as a sex offender. And I would really like it if they can do that in South Africa as well, where you are registered as a sex offender, because I don't see how any person who has been convicted of a crime like revenge porn, remember this person, remember the two elements, the intention to do harm. So it means if you are found guilty, you had the intention to do harm, depending on what's transpired in the case. So any person who had the intention to cause harm to another person in a sexual way, I mean, why wouldn't it apply to all other areas? I mean, if you are going to apply for a job as a teacher, if you're going to apply for a job as a whatever vulnerable position that has vulnerable people in it, you know, like patients and children and old elderly people, things like that. So I think you should be registered as a sex offender if you are found guilty in terms of this new legislation. And then Japan, now in 2020, they also got laws against revenge porn, and there you get a hefty fine and then imprisonment of up to 3 years, And then another thing I want to just quickly touch on, you didn't ask me about it, but I thought I'd mention it, is that sometimes you can't identify the perpetrator. You know, you wonder who's sending this stuff around. It says anonymous, or the person is called dark shadow, or whatever it might be. In that case, you can ask the court to order the cell phone service provider. Say, for instance, there's a number and nobody knows who it belongs to. The cell phone service provider should be ordered to release the identity of the person behind that number or behind that IP address, okay? So if you can't identify the person sending the stuff, then in terms of the act, actually, the service provider can be ordered to release the information of the person to the authorities.
Wow, thank you for that. And I just want to say, you raise it's such an important issue. I think it's in the case with Japan and sexual offences, because really, I hadn't considered this myself, but it is a sexual offence. It really is.
Of course it is.
Explicit photos and put it on the internet and show the world. It's pornography, and just I can just imagine in terms of the harm as well that is done.
Yes. Yeah, the harm that is done is actually it's terrible, because the harm, emotional distress, some people are suicidal after these photographs and images or films are released. Some people are just never the same again. They don't want to go back into their normal lives. They resign from their jobs. So the effects of revenge porn, I wish people can understand. Not just the victim, I mean the perpetrator. I wish they can understand the damaging consequences of this, because I cannot imagine a person, this happening to a person, and then that person just having to go on as normal. People commit suicide. Teenagers, they commit suicide. You know, so it's not something that should be taken lightly. If you are registered as a sex offender for revenge porn, that should be even more deterrent for people that should know better. You know what I mean? Sometimes, say for instance, a young boy who distributes an image, sometimes they don't know better. They don't know the devastating, far-reaching consequences of their action, because they think only in this little world here around them. You know, they're sitting on the internet in their room and they literally think they're protected behind a keyboard. They don't realize it's a crime. Maybe a 12-year-old boy wanting to bully his friend. You know what I mean? I'm sure there will be mitigating circumstances there. But if a grown person, and for instance, it's a professional, maybe a teacher, maybe a journalist, maybe a person that should know better, a reasonable person, if that person purposefully distribute these images of a person, wanting to punish them for something, wanting to harm their reputation, you are a sex offender. You have taken a sexual image and you have offended someone.
Thank you so much, Nazli. We're out of time, but I want to thank you so much for coming onto the show and for sharing your thoughts with us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me again.
That was Nazli Williams from Patton Williams Attorneys taking us through what to do if your private pictures have been posted online. Now we're going to take a short break and we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we're speaking about revenge porn and the posting of naked pictures of sexually explicit content online without the subject's consent. Now, when you do send private pictures to someone, no one expects that it's going to end up on Facebook or Twitter or the internet, but these things do happen. Here are a few tips to help you prevent this from happening or help you weather the storm if it does. With the advent of the camera phone came the ability to capture our lives and ourselves anywhere, anytime, and also opened the door to taking intimate pictures and videos of ourselves for fun, for art, or even for sharing with other people, which we've discovered is accompanied by a high degree of risk, the biggest of which is the risk of having our risque images posted to the World Wide Web. We've compiled a few tips to help you protect yourself and your media, or, if it's too late, to take action if someone has posted your private pictures publicly. Number 1, the most obvious, don't take or send nude pictures or videos. They say prevention is better than cure, but in the case of social media, often there's no 100% cure. You may take legal action and put the perpetrator who posted the pictures behind bars, but your media will have been seen by many people, or worse, still be up there. If it doesn't exist, it can't be uploaded. Number 2, leave out or crop out your face. Your body and privates are one thing, but without a face to go along with it, it'll be hard to prove it's you. Unless, number 3, you have distinguishing marks like a tattoo or birthmark. If you do, you should crop those out or cover it with a smiley face. Number 4, chat applications are getting more sophisticated, allowing you to auto-delete messages and media after it has been sent. This isn't a guarantee, of course. All it takes is a screenshot, but it does add an extra layer of protection. Here is a list of the apps with auto-delete for messages. WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and Instagram Messenger now all allow you to set certain contacts to vanish mode by clicking on the contact's name and then switching on disappearing messages. Messages will automatically delete after 7 days. Facebook Messenger also has the option of starting a secret conversation with someone that allows you to set a timer for messages to self-destruct after it has been read. Telegram is the alternative to WhatsApp that many people turn to after the big WhatsApp data policy update. It also has a self-destruct timer feature for messages to disappear after they've been read. And last but not least, Snapchat servers are designed to automatically delete messages sent in one-on-one chat after both Snapchatters have opened and left the chat. Messages can also be set to delete after 24 hours by changing the erase rules in chat settings. If, however, the pictures or videos have already been posted online, we recommend the following options. Number 1, take as many screenshots of the offending posts as possible to save as evidence. Number 2, copy the links or URLs to the posts. Number 3, if you know who posted the pictures, you can go to the police station and lay a criminal charge against that person. And number 4, go to the court and start an application for a protection order or a protection from harassment order to stop the person from sharing the media any further. And that's all we have for this evening. I urge everyone to be safe if you do take pictures. Try not to send them. If you do send them, make sure it's to somebody that you trust. I'm Lenina Rasool. Good night.